Hello everybody, welcome to day 9 of the 10-day Living Yoga Challenge. I can't believe we've made it this far. We have only one day left after today. But this morning we're going to be diving into the second to last of the Niyamas, which is called Svādhyāya. Svādhyāya is often translated as self-study or the idea of reflection on the self. And before we go straight into some examples, this is an interesting one for me, one that I've always, out of the 10 Yamas and Niyamas, I've kind of grappled with this concept, and it's both, simple and complex. It's broad and yet it's narrow. I'll be interested to hear your guys' reaction to this concept and how this plays out for you. But basically, I like to think of Svādhyāya as kind of the goal of this practice off the mat is to come to a place of inner stillness, a place of peace, a place when we can recognize that, or really come to know our true self. And when I'm saying the word self here, I'm envisioning, a capital S. So when we get deeply into this practice of studying ourselves, we come to recognize that the fluctuations of our mind, our emotions, our reactions to external events, our fears, our motivations, we start to recognize that all of those things are really kind of connected to the physical self, the ego self, the survival self, self with a lowercase s. And so as we start to become more aware of those parts of, I'm going to call it lower self, then we start to observe that actually that self is separate from self with a capital S, from our higher selves, from the true essence of who we are as divine beings who are having a human experience. And this concept too, I've talked about before, all the yamas and the niyamas are very intertwined with one another. And I think as we go a little further into some examples of how we can live this practice, you'll start to see the connections. I feel that it's very related to aparigraha, this idea of, non-grasping, non-greed, not holding on to things. For example, as we study and reflect on ourselves, we start to notice where we are holding on to our thoughts, our feelings, and making those things who we really are. I think this connects definitely to Satya, the idea of truth. What is the true essence of ourselves at our core? And I think also I see it connected to brahmacharya, right use of energy, that studying, reflecting, and getting to know the self, both lowercase s and uppercase s on a deep level, is really the correct use of our energy here in this lifetime. And then I think also the idea of tapas, of discipline, of dedicating ourselves to something. What better thing to dedicate ourselves to and to work diligently on than studying ourselves, reflecting on ourselves. So a lot of different connections that I see there for personally. But again, I know this one, it's, as I said, simple and also complex. So, the first example of how this idea of Svādhyāya can play out is with the idea of engaging with spiritual text or scripture, sacred text. So this can be reading Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. This can be studying the Vedas. This can be studying a Hindu text, a Buddhist text. It can be engaging with the Bible, any type of spiritual text or sacred scripture that's going to help us to reflect on the ideas of kind of separating our egoic, kind of mundane, earthly self from the higher aspects of self of who we really are. Another example of how we can live this practice is by working with a teacher or a mentor. So I would suggest, look for someone in your life who you feel really embodies these different principles, these yamas and niyamas that we've been studying. And we definitely want to look for someone who is maybe a little further along in their own personal journey than we are, because that's someone that we're going to be able to learn from. So, if you find such a person in your life, or you can connect with someone through social media, however you might find them, engage them in conversation, listen to what they have to say, ask them questions. And then I think most importantly, learn from their example. So hopefully each individual, as they're on their own personal journey, is trying to lead by example through their life, through their actions or non-actions, and we can take that example. And I just want to say too that it doesn't, I'm not suggesting that everyone run out and find a guru. I have a lot of issue with the idea of guru, master, that type of thing, because I think this person can be anybody, can be a friend, can be a family member, can be a neighbor, can be a colleague, just someone in whom you recognize that they are also kind of trying to do the important work of deep self-study and self-analysis and kind of being on this spiritual path, so to speak. And then I think the last example that I can give today of how we can live Svādhyāya off of the mat really truly is by starting to pay much closer attention to, starting to really observe and notice our behaviors, our reactions to things. So I think really coming to know our own minds and our own emotions, and especially what triggers those things, that is hugely valuable in this process. Being able to, step back and take notes on how you engage in different situations that come up. And I'm talking most specifically about difficult situations, one in which there is tension, ones in which emotions are running high, ones in which, as I talked about a minute ago, we feel deeply triggered in some way. So it's when we're in those situations or in those types of relationships with others, just noticing, like, how are we reacting? I think also too, like, coming to know, okay, what does our ego self fear? What does our ego self crave and desire? And ultimately, like, where are those really coming from? And so all these observations really help you to know, as we talked about before, like that ego self, the mind self, the emotional self with a lowercase s. And I think only by really deeply understanding those things can we then start to see what's kind of behind all of that in the background, what's underneath, or the foundation, self with a capital S, really like the divine essence of who we each are. So to that end, I know this wasn't a super long video here this morning, but it's an interesting topic for me to talk about here and kind of try to share and collect my thoughts on this. But today's Live Your Yoga Off the Mat challenge is going to be twofold. So the first thing I'd like you to do is try to engage with some type of spiritual or sacred text today, one that is going to help you to kind of further the concepts, further understand and think about the concepts that we have been talking about all throughout this challenge. If you're not sure where to begin, I'm going to give some suggestions in today's email, so make sure to check there. The second thing I'd like you to do to live this concept of Svādhyāya off the mat is to study your own reactions to things today. So whatever situations happen for you, I want you to stop and notice when you're annoyed. Notice when you're bored. Notice when you're mad. Notice when you feel this like hopeless despair. I hope you're not experiencing those things, but it may come up for you today. You never know. And then at the end of the day, kind of try to remember some of those instances. And I want you to just reflect on them in a journal or in your mind. I want you to probe yourself a little bit further to try to understand, what's really involved in all of that, and how can we start to separate ourselves from that? How can we start to become the observer of that instead of kind of the puppet that is that just has to play along with all those fluctuations of mind and emotions and everything that happens on a daily basis for us. So those are going to be the two things that I'm going to challenge you to do today. And tomorrow will be day 10, the final day of this challenge. I'm excited that we've made it thus far. And don't forget that tomorrow will culminate with a restorative yoga practice live on Zoom. So if you're part of this 10-day living yoga challenge, you'll get an email that has the Zoom link and the playlist and instructions for everything that I'm going to suggest that you use during that class as well. So just make sure you're on the lookout for that email. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful day.